In 1775, the 13 colonies fought the British Empire to help the United States become their own empire after the British started to rule with no limits to power. There were many significant fights, ambushes, defeats, and victories, but in the end, they came victorious. After the war, the colonies, never wanting to happen again, wrote the Declaration of Independence, an article to help them stay safe internationally and nationally wise. This document or article made eventual laws to help people create peace in the future, helped start protests, and make better versions of itself. Without Declaration of Independence, it would be hard to make new laws and be protected. Background to really understand the making of the Declaration of Independence and how it affected the 13 colonies, we must first go back to 1600 to 1774. On 1600, the British Empire, Great Britain, took control over the 13 colonies. Basically, Britain controlled everything, including first the trade, which passed through Britain, which was the Britain Act, was the Sugar Act, which controlled sugar trade or export out of the country. This was an issue because there was no representation in the parliament in a certain type of government. Where there was a king or queen that is at the top of the house. Earlier parliaments, kings or queens had absolutely no limits to how and what they could do in terms of anything, but their roles have strong power anyways. They were mad because there is no representation in laws. They were making in which they were not able to vote to or help decide the laws was passed or not. After that was the Town and Act, which instituted taxes on glass, the lead paints, and paper, the Quebec Art, which allowed French Catholics to obtain good jobs, in the Government Tea Act, which was a TAA tax in American colonies, the Interable Acts, which was a series for laws passed by British Parliament to punish the colony of Massachusetts for the Boston Tea Party. The Declaration Act, which meant the Parliament could make laws for all the colonies, not matter what the Quartering Acts, which let Great Britain soldiers stay in houses in America. And finally, the Stamp Act, which forced colonies to pay a tax represented by a stamp on various forms of paper. After the Stamp Act, the Boston Massacre happened, which involves the King's soldiers to kill 4 pedestrians that lived in Boston during a riot. Thomas Paine, an author and famous English politician, made a book called Common Sense, which talks about seeking independence from Britain. He showed it to people and they thought it was crazy, but after sided with him, and this inspired the army to have a war, so 13 colonies has decided to go to war with Britain. There were many battles. Most battles were memorable, including the Lexington and Conqueror battle, where the British came and tried to storm colonists, but they were already waiting, and 300 to 400 colonies let loose on the British, and they were forced to retreat. Another memorable battle. Bunker Hill, which was the first battle and very bloody. The British in their own territory marched up a hill to get colonists, but they had a disadvantage because the colonists at the top they laid their wasteland, but in the vain they were destroyed and had to leave. Another memorable battle is, of course, Yorktown, because as we know, the Siege of Yorktown. This was probably the most famous one because it was a battle that ended all of the American colonists and some other nations entrapped as a British army on Pennsylvania in Yorktown, Virginia, facing Britain to surrender and giving colonists freedom. There were over 230 battles, but all of them led to one point, and this was just the Declaration of Independence. the Declaration of Independence Act, after the war has ended in the U.S., 13 colonies went back to their homeland, and finally they were at independent nations after Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Roger Stevensman, and Benjamin Franklin, and Robert and Livingston wrote the Declaration of Independence, and a total of 56 delegates of the Constitutional Congress approved it. And it was raflated. The Declaration of Independence talks about the colonist movements to seek independence from Great Britain. First, the Declaration of Independence talks about the famous paragraph called the Premable says we were the people of the United States to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquilities, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves, and prosecute, do, ordain, and establish his constitutions for the United States of America. One of the things this document talks about is the three unalienable rights of liberty and the pursuit of happiness. These are the rights that cannot be violated. Thus, they were called at the Declaration body. It talks about Committee 5, John Adams, Rogers, Benjamin Franklin, and Thomas Jefferson. These people drafted and presented full Congress about the Declaration of Independence and how it would help the United States on July 4, 1776. It was also told that the world, including Great Britain, that were now independent country. The final part of the Declaration of Independence claims how they are freed from England and breaks ties with free England completely. Therefore, the United States affirms that the 13 colonies are free and independent states. After the Declaration of Independence was published, the colonies elected the first president, George Washington, which was on 1789. There were some disagreements, but the Declaration in itself, on the website Museum of the American Revolution, it tells us that there are people, revolutionaries, who had been under Britain rule, but after the Declaration of Independence was in place, they no longer felt this separation. Undefined, however, people, lobbyists, were very unhappy because they thought that the Continental Congress actors were most legal and did not present. Most of the American colonists wanted to see the governor of Massachusetts, Thomas Hunchman, and also decrees of the thesis were life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Unalienable rights of he states that were oh because so many enslaved people were deprived of them. On the website, it talks about the short-range and long-range effects of the Declaration of Independence. Some of the short SL immediate effects that happened were the writing of the Articles of Confederation, which was the 13 colonies' first frame of the government and was made on 1777. It was very weak article, though it was weak. It relied heavily on states of governments to maintain power, like armies, funding, regulation, trade. They were basically useless after the U.S. realized that the Article of Confederation was bad and they needed a strong central government, which led the Federalist Paper versus anti-Federalist papers, which because the Federalist was much better writing, was decided as the new Article of Federation, aka the birth of the Constitutions, on March 4th. 1789, on December 15, 1791, the Bill of Rights was first 10th Amendment of the Constitution was ratified, with therefore 27 amendments in the total, but some were very significant. Amendments were the Bill of Rights first, the 10th, the 13th Amendment was prohibited slavery, the 14th Amendment, which gave citizenship to people, 15th Amendment, which made voting legal, to 19th Amendment, which allowed women to have the same voting rights as men, and the 24th Amendment, which also stopped poll tax. And there was 27 amendments, but those who were just some of the famous ones and the French Revolutionary War. After the revolution had ended on Declaration of Independence had been ratified on May 5th, 1789. The French had their own revolutionary but ideas about equality and liberty inspired the French to fight for their own independence. This inspired movements for the French. The United States also gained recognition by the other nations, and the first one to believe it or not was France. There was 34 in total NATO members: Japanese, South Korean, Australian, which are the three Pacific allies.